Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump comparing violence in Los Angeles to an invasion while doubling down on sending troops there. How a judge responds to California's bid to block Trump and what Trump is warning about a potential spread of protests. Iris Tao at the White House. Tensions have eased in downtown Los Angeles, but officials are preparing for a fifth day of protests. The National Guard and police remain stationed outside the city's federal building. Christina Corona reporting from LA. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers pressed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on the administration's move to deploy troops to LA during a hearing about defense spending for the next fiscal year. Luis Martinez has the highlights from that hearing, which at times became heated. A school shooting in Austria leaves at least 10 people dead. Local police say a number of wounded are being treated. What we know so far.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. President Trump doubles down on the need for federal intervention as he deploys active duty Marines and more National Guard troops to Los Angeles. He's also warning of heavy force if protests spread to this weekend's military parade in Washington, D.C. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. What are the president's latest comments today on the Los Angeles protests?
Good evening to you as well, Tiff. So President Trump was just speaking to thousands of service members as well as veterans at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. And he again doubled down on his decision to send hundreds of active duty Marines as well as now 4,000 approximately National Guard troops to Los Angeles. He says that if he hadn't do it, the city would be burned down, adding that the Democratic leaders in the city are not doing enough. Watch.
If we didn't do it, there wouldn't be a Los Angeles. It'd be burning today, just like their houses were burning a number of months ago. Generations of Army heroes did not shed their blood on distant shores only to watch our country be destroyed by invasion and third world lawlessness here at home, like is happening in California. As Commander-in-Chief, I will not let that happen.
And while President Trump has activated troops to be sent to Los Angeles, he has not used the Insurrection Act. And without doing that, the National Guard as well as Marines there will not be allowed to perform law enforcement duties as they are active troops on U.S. soil. And meanwhile, Trump today, though, said he would certainly invoke the Insurrection Act if there is an insurrection in that area, adding that actually some parts of Los Angeles last night, quote, you could have called it an insurrection. President Trump today also alleges that some of the violent protesters there are actually professionally trained agitators, citing their equipment, which Trump calls professional, as well as actions such as breaking up curbs with hammers to use it and then use the blocks as weapons. Watch.
Attempting to infiltrate and occupy federal buildings wearing armor and face shields. The best money can buy, somebody's financing it. We're going to find out through Pam Bondi and Department of Justice who it is. They're already on it. Who's financing all this equipment? Very professional.
The president today also compared the situation in Los Angeles to a foreign invasion. He says that it's largely blameable on the Biden era's open border policy, which allowed in, for example, he says, gang members as well as drug lords. He vows to, under his administration, liberate Los Angeles and make it clean as well as safe again. Watch.
And they're the heroes. They're fighting for us. They're stopping an invasion just like you'd stop an invasion. And the only flag that will wave triumphant over the streets of Los Angeles is the American flag. So help me God.
And earlier today, while speaking from the Oval Office, President Trump says that his upcoming grand military parade is coming up this Saturday as part of the celebration for the 250th birthday for the U.S. Army. And that's also what led him to Fort Bragg today. He says that if there are protesters trying to interrupt that here in Washington, D.C., they will be met with, well, heavy force. Back to you.
And Iris, California today is asking the court to block the Trump administration from using troops in enforcing laws in the state, including an ICE raid. What's the latest on that?
So the latest we're hearing is that a judge has now denied that request from the state of California, instead scheduling a hearing for this Thursday afternoon over the state's request. So a lot to be seen still over the legal battle unfolding between the Trump administration as well as the state of California. Back to you.
All right, Iris, thanks for those updates. And how are everyday folks reacting to President Trump's response to the Los Angeles riots? And what do they make of California Governor Gavin Newsom's lawsuit against the administration? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from the people.
What do you make of President Trump's decision to send in 700 active duty Marines to California?
Well, they're seeing things that we're not seeing. It's hard for me to judge that, and probably anyone else too. He's probably just trying to do the best he can to get this situation resolved. And I would think that the people there would kind of be more thankful in their response of what he's trying to do to help.
The state of California has been monitoring a lot of it. So I think sending in all the Marines, sending in all the National Guard, I think a lot of that's been unnecessary.
He has the people in California telling him, we don't need this, we can take care of it. The governor of California did not request, this has never happened before, where National Guard were sent in without the request of the governor.
I mean, I don't know. They show cars burning, so that doesn't seem good.
I think it's a good idea to back them up, back the local police department up. I don't know why the protesters have to be so violent, and they accuse everybody else of being violent, but they're the ones that instigate all this stuff, and we're just trying to stop it.
What do you make of California Governor Gavin Newsom's decision to sue the Trump administration over this?
Well, I don't understand all the legalities of that, but I think, yeah, they need to push back in legal ways.
Yeah, usually it'd be all about the states being in charge, but it doesn't seem like he's trying real hard.
He hasn't done the job in California that he's supposed to do anyway, and he's blaming everybody else for it. He's the one in charge. It ought to be up to him to fix things in his own state, but he hasn't done it.
I definitely understand his he wants to control the situation as the governor of the state and doesn't want President Trump involved, and I understand that sentiment he has.
Seems like it's something irrational. I would probably say maybe he needs to put a little more thought into it and just realize that people are trying to help you and give you assistance to help the situation so you don't get overwhelmed by it.
With protests planned to expand to all 50 states, where are protesters getting their funding, and what do agitators ultimately want to achieve? Here on the ground, insights from Joshua Phillip, investigative reporter with the Epic Times, tonight on Capitol Report with Steve Lance at 7 p.m. Eastern. FBI Director Kash Patel says the Bureau is investigating possible instigators. He made the statement to media outlet Just the News yesterday. Patel said that the FBI is looking into all monetary ties linked to the riots. The first protests following immigration raids last week were largely peaceful. Many demonstrations turned violent over the weekend. The report said that one of the groups involved in the LA riots was called the Party for Socialist Liberation. It's a Marxist group with alleged links to the Chinese Communist Party. Just the News reported that the organization was also behind some of the anti-Israel protests across university campuses. What was supposed to be a hearing on the Department of Defense's budget for fiscal year 2026 became a grilling by Democrats on how the departments responded to the violent protests in LA over the weekend. Our Washington correspondent Luis Eduardo Martinez has the details.
Credible deterrence starts at home, and it starts with securing our borders. We will achieve 100% operational control of the southern border, with crossings already dropped 99.9%.
Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth defended the president's budget request for the Department of Defense for fiscal year 2026 in what was the first of 4 appearances before Congress this week. Democrats appeared mainly concerned with this year's budgetary allocations.
How much are these deployments going to cost for both the Marines and the National Guard? And what training or duties are not taking place because of these deployments?
Unlike the previous administration, we've got a 13% increase in our defense budget, and we will have the capability to cover down on contingencies, which is something the National Guard and the Marine plan for.
House Democrats condemned the administration's rapid response to the violent protests in LA over the weekend and accused federal law enforcement of attacking lawmakers.
We are gathered here today because, like so many Americans, we are outraged by what we are witnessing in the streets of Los Angeles and in communities across our nation. President Trump's unlawful decision to deploy the National Guard onto the streets of Los Angeles.
DHS and ICE are emboldened by this administration, using chemical agents against members of Congress.
I don't like the idea that the minute the president says there's violence, the press kind of responds to that.
Congresswoman Maxine Waters of California denied any wrongdoing by alleged protesters in LA over the weekend and asked people not to believe what is being reported.
There were few people outside. They were not protesting. But guess who really had the attention? It was the National Guard, armed with huge, look like AK-47, huge weapons pointed at the people on the sidewalk who were barely protesting at all.
The administration's budget request for the Department of Defense for fiscal year 2026 surpasses $1 trillion for the first time ever, with expanded roles in border security and drug interdiction for the military. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Turning to the Austria school shooting, authorities in Graz said the alleged gunman also died by suicide in a school bathroom. The motive for an attack that shocked the nation is not yet known. Austria's largest newspaper reported that police had found a note left by the shooter at his home. Authorities say they believe the 21-year-old acted alone when he entered the school with 2 guns and opened fire, killing 10 people. At least 11 people were wounded. 1 victim remained in critical condition. Austrian Chancellor Christian Stocker called the shooting a national tragedy and announced 3 days of national mourning. Coming up, the Israeli Navy strikes a port in Yemen. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that progress has been made on reaching a ceasefire deal in the Gaza Strip. Jason Perry reports. After another deadly attack, Ukraine says it wants more sanctions on Russia. Ariane Pozdar has what the U.S. says about the status of the peace efforts. And the U.S. and China are meeting for a second day of trade talks today in London. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick discusses the progress. That and more when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The Israeli Navy launches strikes in Yemen on a port belonging to the Iran-backed Houthi terrorist group. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that progress has been made on reaching a ceasefire deal in the Gaza Strip. NTD's Jason Perry has the details.
In a video released on Tuesday, Israeli service members looked on from the Navy's Operations Center as a missile ship prepared to launch strikes in Yemen. Israeli forces reported launching multiple strikes on Yemen's Hodeidah port, which was being used by the Iran-backed Houthis for terrorist activity. And on the same day, sirens sounded in Israel as residents appeared to seek cover. The Israeli military said that a missile was fired from Yemen and that it was, quote, most likely intercepted. Meanwhile, the boat that carried Swedish activist Greta Thunberg and 11 others was seen docked at a port in Israel on Tuesday. The activists sailed from Italy, hoping to reach the Gaza Strip and deliver aid to residents and break Israel's sea blockade on Gaza. However, Israeli forces took control of the boat before it reached Gaza. Thunberg was deported from Israel on Tuesday. Israel's foreign minister Gideon Sa'ar gave an update.
Greta departed Israel for Sweden earlier today. Another person departed and 2 others will leave later today. Member of the European Parliament, Rima Hassan, has so far refused to sign deportation documents, as have 7 others.
Also on Tuesday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave an update on the ceasefire negotiations over the war in the Gaza Strip.
There is meaningful progress. I think it is too early to hope, but we are working tirelessly in these hours and all the time, and I hope we can make progress.
And just the day before, President Trump said that Iran is involved in the negotiations over hostages held in the Gaza Strip. Iran is known to fund the Hamas terrorist group and other terrorist groups currently waging war against Israel.
Iran actually is involved, and we'll see what's going to happen with Gaza. We want to get the hostages back. That's all I can tell you.
This comes as the U.S. is also involved in talks with Iran over a possible nuclear deal. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce gave an update.
It is a dynamic, as it would be with any diplomatic consideration, that negotiations are meant to move things forward. And the good news is that, in fact, it would appear that things are moving forward, and that's what we all want.
She also said that the U.S. hoped the next round of talks with Iran would be happening soon, but she did not confirm a date or a place. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Another major drone attack reportedly hitting Ukraine today. Officials in Kyiv say Russia launched hundreds of drones, killing at least 3 civilians. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has that and what the U.S. says about the status of its peace efforts.
Ukraine is dealing with the aftermath of yet another reported attack on Tuesday. Kyiv says Russia launched over 300 drones and 2 ballistic missiles made by North Korea. According to officials, most of the drones were aimed at Kyiv. But Ukraine also reports that Russia struck this maternity ward in the southern part of the country.
As soon as we went to the basement, there was an explosion. We heard as if everything began to crumble and collapse. We thought that everything was collapsing here.
Meanwhile, in Russia, Moscow reports that Ukraine struck a gas station in Belgorod near the border. At least 1 civilian is reported dead and 4 injured because of the drone attack. Now, amid these attacks, Kyiv is once again calling for more sanctions on Moscow. A spokesperson says that there is, quote, nothing to wait for. Ukraine suggests that Russia has done enough damage for the West to now impose additional sanctions. And the spokesperson also says that recent talks between Russia and Ukraine in Istanbul didn't actually change anything on the ground. But the State Department on Tuesday saying it does make sense for Russia and Ukraine to keep talking.
The President and the Secretary have been saying for a while that the only real solution can come with the parties talking directly.
Moscow and Kyiv have already met twice in Istanbul. So far, the only tangible progress has been an agreement to exchange prisoners of war. And just on Tuesday, the 2 sides started the second round of the swap. Russia and Ukraine both exchanged sick and wounded prisoners. Ukrainian soldiers were seen hugging their loved ones as they arrived back home. The State Department says it appreciates the progress.
We welcomed the success, the movement of, again, more prisoner exchanges. In this case, of course, the seriously wounded and young prisoners under the age of 25.
Tuesday's exchange also included each side handing over the bodies of approximately 6,000 fallen soldiers. The remaining stages of the swap are expected to be completed this week. Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
The U.S. and China are meeting for a second day of trade talks in London. Commerce Secretary Lutnick discusses the progress.
We've been all day yesterday, and I expect to be all day today. Going well, and we spent lots of time together.
The delegation hopes to secure a breakthrough over export controls for rare earth minerals and other goods that have threatened a fresh rupture between the 2 superpowers. White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett said on Monday that the U.S. was likely to agree to lift export controls on some semiconductors. In return, China would speed up the delivery of rare earths. Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, is a spiritual practice rooted in meditation and moral teachings. It's been a symbol of resilience and peace for millions worldwide. Since 1999, Falun Gong practitioners have faced severe persecution in China, including imprisonment, torture, and even forced organ harvesting. Now, evidence suggests this repression is extending beyond China's borders, reaching the United States. NTD's Daniel Monahan reports.
The operation against Falun Gong intensified in 2022. Internal sources revealed that Chinese Communist leader Xi Jinping personally ordered a renewed campaign against Falun Gong practitioners abroad, complaining they were becoming too effective at exposing the party's crimes overseas. The directive targeted prominent organizations founded by Falun Gong practitioners, including Shenyang Performing Arts, the premier classical Chinese dance and music company that tours globally under the tagline, China Before Communism. Experts say the regime views Shenyang as a direct challenge to its ideological control, undermining its image abroad and threatening its grip on power. In February, the U.S. State Department condemned the CCP's ongoing harassment of Shenyun and called on the party to end its 25-year campaign to eradicate Falun Gong. Several CCP whistleblowers came forward last year with more details. One says the head of China's Ministry of State Security, Chen Yixin, is personally overseeing the campaign. Multiple Western media outlets are reportedly involved as well. Since August of last year, the New York Times published nearly a dozen negative articles about Falun Gong, most relying heavily on claims from a small group of former Shenyun performers, some with links to CCP entities. In response, nearly 800 current and former Shenyun artists and staff signed a petition condemning what they called biased coverage and coordinated attacks. The campaign has also spilled onto social media. An Epoch Times investigation uncovered thousands of fake accounts on X used to share New York Times articles and other anti-Falun Gong propaganda. Some of the accounts were highly sophisticated, posting unrelated lifestyle content for months or even years before suddenly switching to anti-Falun Gong posts. Whistleblowers also say Chinese authorities have been funding YouTubers who portray Falun Gong and Shenyun negatively. One of those YouTubers, mentioned by name in whistleblower accounts, allegedly provided sources for the New York Times stories. He's also been arrested and charged with illegal firearms possession after making threatening comments directed at Shenyun staff. The CCP has also weaponized lawfare. An American man with long-standing business ties to China filed multiple faulty environmental lawsuits targeting Shenyun's campus in Orange County, New York. The most recent was dismissed in September 2024 with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. And in July 2024, 2 Chinese Americans pled guilty to acting as agents of Beijing after trying to bribe an IRS agent to launch a bogus investigation into Shenyun. Threats have also escalated. Shenyun has received dozens of false bomb and death threats aimed at theaters and training facilities. In January, one threat claimed the sender had built a large number of incendiary bombs and planned to burn Shenyun's training studios. Another threatened to kill lawmakers who support Shenyun or Falun Gong using car bombs. In April, a separate message threatened to drive a car into a Falun Gong parade in New York. And now a new tactic is surfacing: small-scale protests by non-Chinese individuals holding banners and distributing anti-Falun Gong materials often found in China. Eyewitnesses say one protester admitted to being paid $200 to take part. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Coming up, ICE says that 122 illegal immigrants have been deported back to China, including some convicted of severe crimes, including murder and rape. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has that story after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Downtown Los Angeles remains on edge as officials brace for another day of protests. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more from the heart of the city.
We're here in downtown Los Angeles, standing outside of the Roybal Federal Building, where there is a heavy National Guard's presence. As you can see behind me, several National Guardsmen are geared up in their riot gear, preparing for another day of protests. National Guardsmen stood ready in full riot gear. By around noon, roughly 200 protesters had gathered outside the Roybal Federal Building, fewer than the day before, and the scene was noticeably more controlled. Some demonstrators waved flags, chanted, and even played music. During Monday night's protest, looters hit several stores, including the Apple Store, Adidas, and nearby jewelry shops. At a morning press conference, Mayor Karen Bass condemned the violence.
I do believe very strongly is that the groups that are vandalizing downtown are not a part of the immigrant rights movement, are not concerned about immigrants, are concerned about wreaking havoc. The violence and the damage is unacceptable. It is not going to be tolerated, and individuals will be arrested and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And no individual that is involved in vandalism should think because they went home that night that they're off scot-free.
Of those, 96 were failing to disperse. Police also reported 1 arrest each for assault with a deadly weapon, resisting arrest, and vandalism. More protesters are arriving by the minute, but so far the demonstrations remain peaceful. Reporting from downtown Los Angeles, Christina Corona, NTD News.
U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement says that 122 illegal immigrants have been deported back to China. ICE reports that some of them have been convicted of severe crimes, including murder and rape. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports.
ICE says they deported 122 Chinese nationals who were in the country illegally, saying some had been convicted of serious crimes such as murder, lewd acts with a minor, human trafficking, rape, and drug trafficking. ICE Dallas says in a statement, through our interagency partnerships and coordination across ICE field offices, we have successfully removed these individuals, many who were convicted of egregious crimes. This operation not only enhances the public safety of our communities across the U.S., but also strengthens national security. The deportees were put on a special high-risk charter flight after their removes were finalized, according to ICE. And a Wuhan researcher is charged with smuggling biological material into a U.S. lab. FBI Director Kash Patel says that Chinese national Chongshuan Han allegedly sent 4 packages to the U.S. from China containing a biological material related to roundworms to a lab at the University of Michigan. Kash posted on social media upon arriving at the Detroit Metropolitan Airport on June 8th. Han allegedly made false statements to federal officials regarding the packages she had previously mailed and had erased her electronic device just days prior. Han is the 3rd Chinese national charged in a week for smuggling materials for biological research. The other 2 have been accused of smuggling a crop-killing fungus. The criminal complaint says that Han is a member of the Chinese Communist Party. And the House East Asia and Pacific Subcommittee discussed the best approach to combat China's influence in Southeast Asia.
We must show ASEAN partners that China's promises rarely deliver lasting benefits. We also need a bold whole-of-government strategy, one that affirms our leadership, reinforces our alliances, and upholds the sovereignty and rules-based order that underpins a free and open Indo-Pacific.
This is a time to engage in trade negotiations and perhaps look for those opportunities where we can reduce those trade barriers. If Vietnam's willing to contemplate going to zero tariffs, let's engage in what that looks like. Can we work with countries in the region like Indonesia to help develop redundant supplies of critical minerals and develop their geothermal capabilities?
One witness described the Chinese Communist Party's tactics in the South China Sea.
China, for the last decade plus, has engaged in a campaign of coercion in what is often called the gray zone, just below the level of military force, using Coast Guard vessels and militia vessels to intentionally create risks of collision, to bully and intimidate smaller states into giving way in the South China Sea.
Jason Blair, NTD News.
Joining us now to discuss these latest developments is Michael Lucci, founder and CEO of State Armor. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again. Now, this is the 3rd recent arrest involving biological material, this latest one making headlines as the researcher came from Wuhan, bringing up memories of the pandemic. First, what are your thoughts on this latest case?
This is one step in the Chinese Communist Party's asymmetric warfare or gray zone warfare against the United States. What they do is they extract value from the United States and they sow poison, they sow chaos. The academic example that you bring up with the University of Michigan, they have researchers that extract value, they steal intellectual property sometimes, and then what do we catch them doing? Allegedly directly sowing poison into our agriculture system to wipe out our wheat crops, wipe out other crops. We're seeing this across the board because, as the previous mentioned, this is gray zone warfare.
Now, to your point, FBI Director Kash Patel issuing a statement saying in part this case is part of a broader effort from the FBI and our federal partners to heavily crack down on similar pathogen smuggling operations as the CCP works relentlessly to undermine America's research institutions. Now, we saw President Trump announce visa restrictions to Chinese students with ties to the CCP or in sensitive fields like STEM. What other actions are you anticipating this administration will take to counter Chinese infiltration?
I would expect them to start sending Communist Party associated students and professors home. There are military researchers on our campuses. They need to go home. There are students who are spies. The actual legitimate Chinese students know that they're being spied upon. We need to send the spies home. Across the board, though, we need to crack down. We open up with trade. What do? They send us fentanyl. We open up on academics. What do? They steal intellectual property, and then they prepare, as we're seeing here, to sow diseases across our country. So I think that there needs to be a whole of government, whole of society response to the Chinese Communist Party's gray zone warfare upon the United States.
And expanding on that, Michael, what kind of consequences do you think Chinese nationals convicted of these pathogen-related crimes should face to prevent Beijing from exploiting this issue?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because I think that that doesn't get asked often enough. They need to go to jail for such a long period of time that no other Chinese spies are going to want to touch this. One of the failures of the American side has been to underpunish these acts of warfare from a foreign aggressor, from the Chinese Communist Party. We need to be raising all penalties for crimes associated with the Chinese Communist Party or other hostile regimes. State governments are beginning to raise those penalties as is needed when the Communist Party is involved in a crime. The federal government, if someone gets caught in spying, sometimes we just send them to jail for 6 months, send them home to China. They get a parade when they get back there. They need to be going to jail for 6 years, 16 years, 26 years, so they will never imagine doing this again.
Now, on that note, a day after the arrest of the Wuhan researcher, another Chinese national, this one not a student, but a 42-year-old, pled guilty to federal crimes for exporting military items to North Korea. What does this case tell us about cooperation and collaboration among authoritarian regimes? Is this part of a broader campaign against democratic nations?
There's a broad campaign led by the Communist Party. They are the head of the snake behind every global problem. North Korea, Ukraine and Russia, Hamas and Israel, Pakistan and India. The Chinese Communist Party is the head of the snake behind every bad guy across the globe. They cause problems in Latin America, all the theaters I just mentioned. Anywhere they could get the Americans distracted and they could get us burning resources against some proxy warfare, that's exactly what they want to do. That's why they are the #1 supplier of the Russia war machine. That's why they are a big backer of Pakistan. That's why they have all sorts of insidious, relationships with Hamas, these terrorists. That's why they have relationships with the cartels in Mexico that sow poison across our streets. They are the head of the snake behind everything that's evil across this globe.
And given that, Michael, talk to us about the Chinese regime's long history of infiltrating U.S. institutions and what these efforts look like.
Well, Tiffany, it's more of the same. They extract value and then they plant chaos. So there's tons of legitimate interactions. Many of the Chinese nationals who come, they're here just to get an education, but the Communist Party filters into those ranks. They're military officers, they're intelligence officers who are here to steal. They're here to keep an eye on other Chinese nationals. It's the broad, what's called the United Front influence operations, thousands of operatives across the United States here to smother out dissent in our open society and to steal whatever they could steal and cause chaos wherever they could cause chaos. One last thing from Reuters just a couple weeks ago, they put a headline saying that the solar inverters, which go into our power grid, they're super important. And the batteries that go into our power grid, super important. These have backdoors in them that allow the Communist Party to turn off the power across the United States. They have a broad, systematic approach to be able to smother us and paralyze us against our will, and so that they could do whatever they want.
And given everything at stake here, as you just mentioned with the solar panels and the Chinese regime's whole of society approach, talk to us about solutions that state levels can take, not just the federal government, but states themselves.
State attorneys general need to start bringing actions against these Chinese companies that sell these totally corrupted products. There are headlines across the country just this year of healthcare monitors, of solar inverters, of cameras, of all sorts of Chinese products that have undisclosed backdoors. That's consumer fraud. State attorneys general need to bring action. State governments, executives and legislatures need to be passing more and more laws to avoid procuring Chinese products, to keep those Chinese technologies out of critical infrastructure, to divest their pensions, and to crush transnational repression, which is when the Communist Party commits crimes here in order to undermine our constitutional rights.
A lot at stake for sure. Michael Lucci, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
House lawmakers will vote this week to make more cuts to the federal government's budget as leadership works to shore up support from those who say the cuts in the GOP's big budget bill don't go far enough. NTD's Melina Weiskup has more.
The first DOGE cuts that Republicans are looking at codifying is to slash around $9 billion from USAID, that is the United States Agency for International Development, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which contributes funds to news outlets like NPR and PBS. House Republican leadership this morning says they're planning to pass these cuts this Thursday, emphasizing the fact that this big budget bill, now working its way through the Senate, is not a one-and-done deal. House Speaker Mike Johnson says he wants to move these cuts quickly through Congress to reassure his party that they're serious about making cuts.
We're chipping away at it every day, and the rescissions vote on Thursday is an important signal. House Republicans are serious about getting our fiscal house in order, and we'll do that.
But some Republicans are skeptical of cutting funds from public broadcasting because they fear it might impact their community's ability to access emergency information, especially in rural areas. A Republican and Democrat sent out a statement saying that rescinding this funding would isolate rural communities, jeopardizing their access to vital resources they depend on. Now, Republicans are working on making these cuts through something called a rescissions package, which would allow them to make the cuts with only a majority of votes, which is a big deal in the Senate, where most legislation requires a supermajority, meaning that under the Senate's current makeup, most legislation requires Democrat votes. However, how Republicans are approaching this big budget bill and now these planned rescissions packages would allow them to pass them with only Republican votes. The White House is sending Congress several such rescissions packages, so we can expect more to come after this week. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Coming up in the NHL, Florida's convincing win last night over Edmonton puts them just 2 wins away from a second straight title. Dave Martin joins us to discuss when we return. Now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty going on today. But let's start in the NBA as Indiana Pacers guard Tyrese Halliburton acknowledged today that he's dealing with a lower leg thing. What is his status for tomorrow's Game 3?
Yeah, that thing, I guess the thing, equals, discomfort, maybe not quite an injury, but it looks like he's a go. Now, there were some questions after he left Sunday night's press conference, walking with a bit of a limp. Today, he was seen at practice with his right ankle tape. Now, head coach Rick Carlisle said he was not limited at practice, so that's certainly a good thing for the Pacers. And of course, Halliburton, definitely the key to the Pacers' offense. He's their point guard. He's really what makes the team go. Of course, he hit that clutch shot in Game 1 to win it with like 0.3 seconds left. And of course, that's not the first clutch shot he's hit. Now, the Thunder, though, played him very tough in Game 2 and won that one to even up the series. Now, the Pacers, though, they have not lost back-to-back games in more than 3 months. Now, Game 3 will be Wednesday night with the series tied up at 1, but this game will be played in Indianapolis, so slight favor there to the Pacers in this series.
Well, good luck to them. Moving to NFL news, Pittsburgh Steelers upper linebacker TJ Watt has thus far skipped the beginning of the team's mandatory minicamp on Tuesday. What's the reason for his absence?
Well, Watt hasn't publicly said so himself, but sometimes players skip minicamp or even next month's training camp, as leverage for a new contract. And Watt is in the final year of his latest contract, and that's usually when these NFL deals get renegotiated. Now, also, Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin seemed to hint towards that. He said, quote, "We've expressed the desire to get business done. He has as well, and so we'll continue to work. We've been here before." Now, 4 years ago, they were in the same thing with Watt, but he decided to do a hold-in where he did actually show up for the mini camp, and they ended up getting a 4-year contract done. Now, Watt, of course, very important to the Steelers' defense. 3 years ago, he was the NFL's Defensive Player of the Year when he tied the NFL record with 22 and a half sacks in the season. And he's actually led the NFL in sacks 3 of the last 5 years. So I would expect the team will try to do everything they can to get him back in training camp. By the way, they're Aaron Rodgers in training camp with if Watt decides to show up, he'll see Aaron Rodgers there anyway. All right.
It's a lot to watch for there.
A lot to watch for there.
All right, everything's happening at Minicamp. While looking at the NHL Stanley Cup Finals, Florida took a 2-1 lead last night with a dominating win over Edmonton.
Yeah, Florida's Brad Marchand started things off pretty fast. They scored less than a minute into the game. Now Marchand, of course, won Game 2 with that in double overtime with a goal there as well. So obviously Edmonton getting to know him very well. The Panthers really dominated the whole game. They scored 2 times in all 3 periods. The Oilers ended up chasing their goalie then, or pulling their goalie, I should say, Stuart Skinner then in the 3rd period after he allowed 5 shots on 23 attempts. So Florida now up 2-1 in this series over Edmonton. Now, of course, this is a rematch of last year's series, and after 3 games last year, Florida had a 3-0 lead. So Edmonton, of course, has seen these deficits before, so we'll see how they respond. But Game 3 in this series will then be Thursday night in Florida.
Well, looking at tonight's sports schedule, no NBA or NHL games, but all 30 baseball teams are in action. What game or games are you most interested in watching?
Well, certainly Yankees versus Royals. Now, you've got last year's the top 2 finishers in the AL MVP voting with Aaron Judge and Bobby Witt. Now, amazingly, though, Judge is having even a better season. I mean, this guy's always been a great power hitter who's always been able to get on base with a good batting average. This year, though, everything's still the same, except the batting average is even higher. Entering tonight's game, the guy is at Aaron Judge is hitting .396. Now, if he ends the season at .396, that would be the highest in the major leagues since Ted Williams hit .406 back in 1941. Now, of course, the end of the major league season is for another 3.5 months still, so he's still got a ways to go. But last year, of course, he's finished 3rd in batting with a .322 average, on way to winning his third MVP award. Anyway, this year though, .396 average, like I said, that's one of the greatest we've ever seen, even at this point in the season. So people are still loving to watch Aaron Judge. I can't wait to see him tonight too. So I will not be actually at the game though. I just have to be watching it, right?
I was gonna say, no NBA or NHL games. What are you doing?
It's a lonely night with that, but it's gonna be soon. I mean, we're both at the finals of both these sports, and then it's just gonna be baseball for a couple of months here. So some lean times coming up for sports fans.
All the baseball fans will be very eager.
Very happy.
All Davis Allis, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.